Hello and welcome to our second webinar on connecting with Dr. Hazel Harrison. Now, in our first webinar, we looked at connecting with ourselves, and today we are moving the discussion on to talk about connecting with others.
So what we know about our relationships are that they will exist on a continuum. And I really like this idea from David and Bradford and Carol Robin about, how to think about our relationships, not just as, oh, we have a connection with someone or we don't, but obviously that there's this whole range of experience that we can move through. So they say relationships exist on a continuum. At one end, you experience contact without real connection, while at the other end, you feel known, supported, affirmed, and fully accepted. And in the middle of the continuum, you feel attached to people in your life, but with many, you want sort of a closer connection. So if we then start to think about, okay, we have this continuum of relationships, what does that really look like? We can move on to talking about Robin Dunbar's work, and many people might have heard of this. If you haven't, one of the things that he has become famous for is Dunbar's number, which is actually the number of friends that we can maintain and how we can sort of nurture our friendships and what that actually looks like in practice. So there are these kind of concentric circles. If we now really hold this idea of dropping the pebble into the pond, it starts to ripple out. So we start with our really close friendships. I'm going to talk through these stages a little bit more in a minute. So on average 1.5, and I will explain to you why it's 1.5, and then moving out to the sort of next circle around, which tends to be sort of 5 close friends, and then the next circle beyond that, which is 15. And each of the friends, by the way, in the circle before counts for that. So your sort of best friend ring is your 5 close friends and then 10 more. And then from your best friends ring, it moves out into being 50 good friends. And then beyond that, it's 150 of your friends. And basically, give or take, depending on your age and gender and where you live, we have around 150 friends. We can't really sustain more than 150 friends. So beyond that circle, they become kind of acquaintances or familiar faces, but we wouldn't necessarily think of them as friends. So if I go back to the middle of the circle for a minute then, at 1.5, basically what they found in Robin Dunbar and others who've been looking at this is that, and please don't everyone think this is a massively sexist comment, I'm just reporting what it says from the research. So basically, women tend to have a partner and a best friend that goes into that circle. So I guess if this is a circle for women, then it would be 2 in the middle bit. Men tend to have either a best friend or a romantic partner. So therefore their circle is just 1. Generally. Now this is averages, and I'm sure that there'll be lots of men listening that will say that's not true for me, and maybe women that are saying it's the other way around for them. So I'm just presenting what it says generally. So then if we move from that circle to the 5 close friends, one of the other interesting things in relation to gender is that females tend to have slightly more than 5 in that sort of close friendship ring than men, but it averages out around 5. And I suppose if we're thinking about age as well, these circles might have more people in them when we were younger. And as we age, less in them. So our friendships, and the number of friends that we have decreases. But what I think is interesting about this is when we start to break it down to how do I know then which friend is in which circle? And so really it's a couple of things that they have been looking at. And firstly, it's kind of the frequency of contact. And what they're saying is really the amount of contact that we have with our friends dictates generally how close we feel to them. Now, one of my best friends moved to Switzerland a few years ago, and it has been really difficult to maintain the closeness that we had before she moved away. But we've had to do things like scheduling in, you know, video calls every week, using WhatsApp voice message to connect on a more sort of regular basis, almost daily, probably. Strategies that maybe we wouldn't have implemented if we were living just down the road from each other, but things that have maintained in order to, I guess, keep that degree of closeness that we might feel. So for that 5 group, the kind of close friends, it's often contact around once a week. For the 15 group, it's about once a month. For the 50 group, it's about once every 6 months. And for the 150, it's something around once a year. And the reason that kind of Robin Dunbar would say, you know, we can dictate this degree of closeness is that time isn't, you know, something that we can sort of negotiate, right? We have a certain number of minutes in our day. And so when we decide to invest in one friendship, that might mean that we can't invest in the other at the same time. So we have to think about how we are maintaining these relationships. And actually, we just couldn't possibly contact 150 of them once a week in order to maintain that sense of closeness, right? So we have to kind of decide, I suppose, which are the friendships that we're investing in. And maybe it's not necessarily a conversation that you sit down and have with yourself. It's just what starts to evolve, you know, and you probably might start to notice, if you're thinking about this now, oh yeah, I probably have contacted, you know, those ones that are really close to me over the past week or so, but maybe not so much the others. So I think then if we move back into that, focusing on the middle part of our sort of pebble ripple, we come back into those real kind of intimate relationships, then there are things that we can think about that we know from science will nurture that relationship. So I'm going to talk through those, but I'm talking through that with the premise that, you know, some people may not have that relationship right now, and that's okay. You know, some people might feel like, oh, that investing in that relationship is the last thing I want to do right now. You know, I just want to, I suppose, talk through here are some things that we know might make a difference, so that we have that information and we can reflect on it and use it maybe when we want to. So the Gottman Institute have done a lot of research into trying to understand what helps people to stay together in their romantic relationships. And they have come up with ratios of how we communicate and the types of communication that we have in our relationships. And what they found was that they could actually quite scarily accurately predict which relationships were going to stay together, based on how couples navigated conflict and the positivity ratio that was involved in their discussions with each other and how they were around each other. So what they found is that actually we need something like a ratio of 5 to 1 positivity within our relationship in order for us to stay with that partner. And I'm going to talk about what these positivity things look like in practice, because there's a whole range of them that we can employ. But basically 5 to 1 seemed to be the sort of minimum. And that was when couples were sort of in conflict, but moves up to something like 20 to 1 when, you know, relationships are really thriving. And what I take from this is the importance of us being really mindful about how we are in relationships with others, and recognizing that for every negative thing that we may say or action that's negative towards our partner, we basically need, in order to provide this balance, 5 positive things, right? So if everyone's sitting there feeling really awful about the fight they just had about the, you know, partner not taking out the rubbish or whatever it is, you need to up those 5 things for when they get home. Okay, so here are some of the things that they recognize are helpful to build that positivity side. So first of all, showing appreciation, right? Really important that we recognize and appreciate the things that partners and closest friends are doing for us to support us, and by saying thank you, you know. So it comes back to some of those conversations that we've had previously around gratitude and the power of gratitude. Affection, can be physical affection. You know, we know the power of touch, of holding someone's hand, of an arm around a shoulder, of a 15-second hug to release oxytocin. You know, it can be physical affection, but it can be affection in the words that we use and the way that we speak to someone else. Listening, right? Really hard sometimes to really fully be present and listen when there's so many things that maybe are whirring through our mind and the things that we need to do next, and we haven't really got time to listen to the story about what just happened at work. But really a powerful way of nurturing a relationship, and really a helpful skill for us all, I guess, to keep practicing. Offering to help. Offering to help by reducing the load that someone else is experiencing, when you recognize that maybe there's a way that we can support that person. And obviously these are sort of reciprocal, so hopefully these come back to you too from your partner. Holding in mind when you're not together. So and I think, you know, this applies for me definitely with my closest friends too, that I was just thinking of you, saw this funny thing, or, you know, sending some way of connecting, or buying their favorite, I don't know, biscuit when you're out and about, or, you know, sending a photo of something that you know that they would love. All we're doing when we're connecting in that way is saying, even when we're not together, I'm still holding you in mind, and I'm still thinking of you occasionally. And that's a really powerful way for us to nurture our relationships. Validating their experiences, validating what they're going through. We've talked about that importance of honesty with our own relationship with ourselves, and, you know, talking about our thoughts and our feelings and getting comfortable with what we're experiencing. So if we then start to branch that out a bit further, that can be about acknowledging and appreciating and validating what someone else is experiencing too. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to agree with that, but you're recognizing that that's someone else's emotional experience right now. And having someone do that can be incredibly powerful in helping to process and move through. Have fun, right? We need to laugh with our closest friends and our partners. This is a really important part of being connected, is actually the fun that we can have with those people that really matter to us. And respond. So throughout your day, you may notice that there are what the Gottman Institute would call bids for attention. So things that your partner may do that signal that they want you to respond to them. And sometimes we might completely ignore those bids for attention, you know, and sometimes we are attuned to what they are. We can't necessarily respond all the time. And actually, probably statistically, I don't think the Gottman Institute would say you have to, but we have to respond enough of the time so that it makes us feel closer and connected again. And empathizing, right? Being able to put ourselves in their shoes, see things from their perspective, understand their experiences, even if it's different from what we're experiencing. Being able to put ourselves in someone else's shoes is a really powerful way of helping that connection to happen. So like I say, even if you're not in a romantic relationship right now, or you don't have that kind of sense that there's that one special person, I think these ideas from the Gottman Institute can be really powerful in all of our relationships that are important to us, you know, not just the kind of one in the middle. So then if we think about that idea that we ripple out and our relationships, you know, move from that frequency of really close contact out through to the outer circle, then I think what's also really important for us to remember is that these aren't dyads. So two people in a relationship that exist without the others too. So what Robin says is life does not consist of a set of unrelated dyadic relationships. What happens in one dyad spills over and affects what happens in another. And so, you know, when we think about that rippling effect, we can think about how powerful each of our relationships are in influencing the other sorts of relationships that we have, and how we learn from certain relationships that we will carry forward into others too. So I think that also helps me to think about that idea that we can't possibly just have one person for everything, right? And I think sometimes we maybe put a lot of pressure on our friendships and our closest relationships to do that, when actually we need to sometimes spread a little bit more in order to have our needs for different types of connections be met in different ways, and to think, I suppose, more consciously about the different types of relationships that we have and what's missing. And rather than necessarily putting lots of pressure on those existing relationships, sometimes it might be about extending or adjusting or shifting some of these dyads, so that it feels sort of more I guess synchronized again. It feels more in balance again. If you've got lots of friends pulling on your resources, for example, you know, then you start to feel a bit unbalanced.
I think that's so true. For sometimes, for certainly, you know, you hope, or you feel disappointed sometimes, but that a friend doesn't tick all boxes. Whereas actually, you should be thinking, you know, you need Spice Girls in your life. You need one of each. You need somebody who you can get dressed up and, you know, go for dinner with. You need somebody you can go to the gym with. You need someone you can sit and chat, so that they can fulfill, different people can fulfill a little bit of each role. And that's much more you know, healthy and less pressurized than feeling let down by someone because they didn't respond in a certain way. But it might just be that it would have been better to look elsewhere for that particular response. So I'm going to take that. I'm going to look for my Spice Girls.
Okay. So yeah, I suppose this is just a sort of summary then of that understanding of thinking that we have to remember that we have these friends beyond the close ones too, and that sometimes things will shift and change in our friendships. Maybe friends will move away, or you know, they'll get a different job that means they'll have less time, or you know, they start a family, or they retire, you know, and all of these things will, I suppose, start to impact on how that closeness with our friendships and our friendship groups, and for us to just be aware of that and how these things will change over time, because we can't possibly nurture every single person in the 150, you know, friends that we have. So there will be this ebb and flow, I think.
Yeah.
So moving then from thinking about how we maintain that closeness and the sorts of things that we can do in those relationships that are, you know, our closest relationships, I wanted to talk about some of Jane Dutton's research in relation to high quality connections. So if we now think about spreading out that circle, right, we're getting wider now, we're moving away further in the ripples of this pond to a place where perhaps it's just about who you bump into when you're out and about. And we call this weak connections. You know, maybe the person who serves you coffee, or the person that you always seem to see on the train in those days when we were commuting, you know, that you might just wave and smile at, or you know, exchange pleasantries, but you wouldn't necessarily describe them as being, you know, in your really close friendship group, right? So what Jane Dutton says is that we have these opportunities for high quality connections with anyone, actually, and they come about from a variety of ways. And I had this opportunity just at the weekend. I took my children to a garden centre because we decided we were going to do plants and pots and get the garden starting to feel a bit more ready for the summer. And the lady who was working in the garden centre was phenomenal at helping people to feel connected. So as we came in, she greeted us with a big smile and she asked us what we were looking for, and we had a conversation about which types of plants would thrive in different areas. And then she met another family who'd been already selecting which plants that they were, you know, they wanted to have, and she was complimenting these young boys on the colors that they'd chosen and how amazing they were going to look together, and then asking how they were going to celebrate Mother's Day. You know, she was using this opportunity to be in a place where people would come to have these high quality connections, these moments of interaction that feel good. So often they come from being present, right? She wasn't half checking her phone whilst also telling me about the plants in the garden centre, right? She was fully there, eye contact, face mask, so that makes it a little bit harder sometimes, I think, because it's difficult sometimes to see, facial expression. But she was looking me right in the eyes. We were having this exchange. I was fully present there with her too. So if we want to build these moments of high quality connection, sometimes it is as simple as looking up, right? We've got to look up from our feet, from our phone, from something else that's driving our attention, to be in that moment with that person. And then there's this aspect of what we would call task enabling, offering some aspect of help. And that's what she was doing, telling me which plants I could put where and how they, that might pan out. Sometimes it's about being vulnerable too, and that helps us to build trust when we're human in those moments. When I'm saying to her, do you know what, gardening is not one of the things that I know very much about. My mum bought me some gardening gloves for Christmas. I'm feeling that's the hint. So I'm kind of being vulnerable there as well. I'm sort of saying, I don't know much. I want you to help me. And then the last area that Jane talks about is this opportunity for sort of positivity resonance, this aspect of kind of matching positive mood with positive mood. Her affect changed how I presented too, because she had so much energy and life that suddenly it kind of brought me up a bit more. And there is an element of kind of playfulness in that dynamic, but there might be, it could be more of a sort of loving dynamic in some other sort of connection, or it could be about a sort of a joint appreciation of awe or gratitude between people. But it's just about matching that positivity with each other, so that your expression of feeling is matched with the person you're with.
Thank you so much for listening. I hope you found it useful, and just to remind you that the full presentation is available in the Be Well team.